بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Respected listeners, welcome once again to another one of our amazing interviews here on the Islamic Literacy Society. Alhamdulillah, we bring you monthly interviews with amazing authors talking about their works, talking about their books. It's a really unique opportunity for us to really delve into the works of our academics, of our intellectuals, and really look into some of this great work. Now, the Islamic Literary Society, you've joined us, you've seen our work. It was founded in 2019 with the aim of promoting, fostering, and developing a heightened appreciation of authors and literary works of classical and contemporary scholarship. Now, this is accomplished by ways of reading, book launches, talks, publishing authors and other speakers, critical reviews and events. And you can see that on our website, which we will talk about a little later. But effectively, the best way, in my opinion, in how to bring about awareness or how to educate ourselves on these matters is directly speaking to these authors. And this is the opportunity that we have with us today. Let us begin by introducing our speaker for today. We have a unique opportunity, actually, an amazing book, an amazing work. So we have with us today Brother Ousmane Oumar Kane, and he holds the Prince Al-Walid ibn Talha chair on the Contemporary Islamic Religion and Society at Harvard Divinity School and the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization at Harvard University since 2012. Kane had received a Bachelor's of Arts in Arabic, a Master's in Islamic Studies from the Institute of National, this is a French name, a very difficult one to pronounce. And the Sheikh will, inshallah, the speaker will tell us. And he has an MPhil and a PhD in political science and Middle Eastern studies as well. So, mashallah, we're getting an amazing amount of information. So let us begin. So, Brother Ousmane, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you today?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala maulana rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa radiyallahu ta'ala an ashabihi wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim. Thank you very much, Ustaz Junaid Dar, for the invitation.
Okay. And Brother Ousmane, just to inform our viewers that Dr. Ousmane is going to be joining us via voice. It's going to be an audio interview, inshallah. You'll get to see me, but our respected guest will be joining us through audio only. So let us begin. Brother Dr. Ousmane, your CV, your credentials are amazing, to say the least. You've achieved a lot, mashallah. Could I ask you to just very briefly give us some of your background and your specialities? What are the things that you focus on and the things that you really work hard in?
As you said, I received a PhD in political science and Middle Eastern studies and a master in Islamic studies in France. I have broad intellectual interests that include Islamic politics, that also include international migration, especially Muslim communities in the West. But in recent years, I specialized into the Islamic intellectual history, especially of Africa. So that's the topic of my two most recent books.
Okay, very nice. And so what was the names of the two of your books?
The first one is Beyond Timbuktu, an intellectual history of Muslim West Africa, which was published by Harvard University Press in 2016. And the second is this edited volume entitled Islamic Scholarship in Africa, New Directions and Global Context. So to say, just if I could add a few words about my background.
Sure.
After receiving my PhD in France from the Institut d'études politiques de Paris, I served for 10 years in Senegal teaching political science there. And I relocated to the United States in 2001, where I taught 10 years also at Columbia University,
SubhanAllah.
School of International and Public Affairs as Associate Professor of International and Public Affairs. And from 2012, I joined Harvard University, the Divinity School, where I was professor of Middle Eastern and languages, professor of Middle Eastern languages and culture, as well as, professor at the Divinity School. But since 2017, I am just affiliated with the Divinity School, and with the Department of African and African American Studies.
MashaAllah, that is absolutely amazing. SubhanAllah, that is years and years of experience, of knowledge. And hopefully today we're going to tap into some of that. So MashaAllah, that's an amazing CV. Okay, so seeing as MashaAllah you've achieved so much, how did this journey actually begin? What encouraged you and motivated you to get into academia and to really go far in this field of yours?
This journey began decades ago in a Quranic school.
Okay.
Which was established by my own mother in Senegal. When I was 3 years old, I started to learn the Quran with her, but also how to write with the Arabic script. And when I was 6, I joined public school to, receive education in French. But alongside that process, I was still attending madrasa education and Islamic studies, and higher Islamic studies. So therefore, it's a long journey, and which combined receiving traditional education in a madrasa, but also modern education, so to speak, in public schools in Senegal, first at the primary and secondary level, and after in France, where I received my PhD.
MashaAllah, so Doctor, would it be fair for me to say that the springboard or the foundation or the source of all that which you have achieved is the Islamic education you received as a child?
I would very strongly agree with that. And, what is true for me is also true for many other people in Senegal, and certainly in other countries of the world too, where people attended, both modern education in Western languages and also in Islamic school. But the foundation, as you rightly said, is really what I learned, at the Quranic school. And it also determined, my specialization in Islamic studies later, even though I received, higher education in Western context in Western universities, but it's really the beginning, the foundation was in the Quranic school set up by my mother.
SubhanAllah, may Allah reward your mother immensely for the work and the effort that she did.
Ameen.
Ameen. Now, coming back to your academia, looking at your role in education, teaching, you've taught in a number of different countries, you've written a number of different books, and of course you read a lot as well. What role does this reading and writing and teaching play in your life? How important is it to you?
Well, I will just say that it is a passion. I have always been curious about, other cultures and languages. And I spent a lot of my time learning foreign languages. I have a good command of many of them, and even languages that I don't know, many, because I have friends who are speakers of those languages. I have always tried to learn a few sentences so that I will be able to communicate with them in their language.
Yeah.
Of course, like all scholars and all people who who are committed to acquiring and sharing knowledge. I devote most of my time reading, teaching in university settings, but also in community settings, like in mosques, in halaqat, in dhikr circles, and in my own house here in Cambridge. I host a weekly halaqa where I teach students and other, members of the community, some important reference work in Islam, like the Kitab al-Hikam, the book of Sufi aphorism of Imam Ibn Atala al-Iskandari, or sections of Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam al-Ghazali, or other books like Imam Sha'rani's Risalat al-Anwar fi Adab al-Suhra, fi Adab al-Suhba, fi Adab al-Suhya inda al-Aghyar, which means epistle of companionship, epistle of epistle of lights on the duties of companionship among the elites. So basically, it's a passion and something that to which I have devoted all my life, or most of my life.
Masha, that's very impressive. Number of languages, and at the same time teaching in different settings, universities, the masjid, the local community. Masha, that is really impressive. Now, Doctor, if we come to your book, Islamic Scholarship in Africa, and we look at this book in a nutshell, for those who want to get a summary of what it is that you are presenting, what does your book argue in a nutshell?
Okay, if you allow me to discuss briefly the first one, Beyond Timbuktu, an intellectual history of Muslim West Africa, because this one is a follow-up volume to Beyond Timbuktu. And I wrote Beyond Timbuktu to introduce intellectuals, especially from Africa, who, were trained in European languages, and these can be called Europhone intellectuals, to this tradition, which many of them knew very little about. And this is due to the fact that after colonialism, the colonial state created schools modeled, on the European schools, where education was offered in European languages. And many people thought that Africa, prior to colonialism, sub-Saharan Africa, did not have an educational system, a literary tradition. So I wrote that book to document, the fact that the history of Islamic education, Arabic writing, but also writings in Ajami, that is using the Arabic script to transcribe African language, spans periods of several decades. Right. And I wanted to introduce them to that book. But then this was just an introduction. And in order to pursue this conversation, I convened a conference in 2017 here at Harvard entitled Text, Knowledge, and Practice, the Meaning of Scholarship in Muslim Africa, in which I invited a number of scholars, some senior scholars, but many junior scholars and some mid-career scholars, in order to explore the main achievements in the field of Islamic scholarship in Africa, but also to identify important themes that have not yet been addressed enough, or that needed to be problematized. And then that conference met in September 2017, in February, but then it was followed by a workshop in which we continued the discussion in order to produce a state-of-the-art volume, but also chart new directions in the fields of Islamic scholarship in Africa. And if you want, I can develop that, elaborate further what are those new directions. But basically, the book, as the title or subtitle suggests, charts new directions in the field of Islamic scholarship in Africa. So if you want, I can answer those questions now or later.
Sure. We will get into all of that. That's something definitely very interesting, especially knowing that our Islam, it teaches us that all Muslims are one entity, one community, irrespective of color, continent, language. We are all one body. Therefore, what would we say? What would you say is the relationship or the historical relationship between Africa and the rest of the Muslim world? What's the bridges there?
Okay. So, as you know, Africa, it's usually divided, in Islamic studies between North Africa and the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, which I think actually is very problematic because it suggests that, the Sahara was a barrier separating these two regions, where in fact we know that it was a bridge that, people from Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and also the Sahara, they have, been in contact. They have exchanged for centuries. And our immediate neighbors are the Arabs. And by the way, the majority of the Arabs are African. They live in the African continent. And about almost 2/3 of the Arabs are African. So when I say Africa and the rest of the Muslim world, obviously, this needs to be clarified. But we have had, we have a long history of interactions through trade, through diplomacy, through intellectual exchanges, through war, of course. And that encounter has been at times violent, as proven by slavery, but it has also been at times peaceful and mutually beneficial, as proven by, the spiritual and intellectual exchanges, as proven by, the spread of Arabic language, which was a mean of exchange and communication between Muslims from Africa and the rest of the world. And now, I just want, if you allow me to address now the role of pilgrimage, Hajj, but also of rihla, or travel for the search of knowledge.
Okay.
In pre-colonial times, pilgrimage was linked to the Hajj, and many pilgrims travel to the Holy Lands in order to perform the pilgrimage, but also in order to learn. They will stop in centers of learning along the way in order to study and some to teach. And then in the Holy Lands, they will, meet Muslims from different parts of the world, exchange ideas with them, copy their books, take them back to Africa. And for this reason, Africans have been reading the writings of scholars from the whole Muslim world as long, for centuries through the pilgrimage, which means that, they have maintained a long history of relations, and specifically because of the pilgrimage, and also because the pilgrimage was also linked to intellectual pursuits, unlike now that, it has been divorced from intellectual pursuit with the rise of nation states.
Yes, but that's a very, very interesting point that you just made. We are made to believe that Islam in Africa is a recent or a modern development where people have gone to spread Islam in Africa. But how would you argue that point? Is Islam deeply rooted in Africa in history, or is this a recent development?
Okay, the first hijrah was not to Medina, but to Abyssinia, to Ethiopia. And the first place of worship or mosque was not built in Medina, but in present-day Eritrea. And it's called the Masjid al-Najashi, or Masjid al-Muhajirin, because the companions that the Prophet sent to the king of Abyssinia, they were welcomed there, allowed to practice their religion, to erect a place of worship. So first hijrah to Africa, second, first mosque in Africa also. Now, after the spread of Islam, after the first century, Islam, started to spread in North Africa, but also it was introduced to Sub-Saharan Africa from North Africa or through the Red Sea to East Africa. So it's as old there as the religion itself, and of course, which means that the learning of the Quran, of Islamic theology, also can be traced to the beginning of the introduction of Islam in Africa. So, but however, the history of local authorship in Arabic, we know that it spans at least a period of 800 years. How do we know that? Because in the 13th century, a residence was established in Al-Azhar, a riwaq, for the benefit of students from Borno in West Africa. Students and pilgrims who were doing the pilgrimage, they had a hostel, a riwaq, built in 1238, which means that they were going there to study, in Al-Azhar. We also know that, and this is the oldest writing that we found, that Ibrahim al-Kanami was also a poet from Borno who recited, verses to the Almohad rule in Marrakesh in the 13th century, and these have been preserved. So we know that at least for 8 centuries, people from Sub-Saharan Africa have been, contributing to Islamic knowledge.
That's very interesting, Doctor, especially with the modern narrative of how we fed the battle between Christianity and Islam in Africa. And clearly we see that Islam was very deep-rooted in Africa, as you made mention. Could we also, or could we say, when we talk about Islamic institutions, we have some famous places, like in Iraq, we had the Bayt al-Hikmah. In Cairo, in Egypt, like you mentioned, we have the Al-Azhar. Were there any centers of knowledge in Africa where people would travel and would learn the sciences?
Oh, there were many such centers, and of course, Sankore in Timbuktu was one. But as I argue in my book, Beyond Timbuktu, Timbuktu is famous, Timbuktu is known, but there were many other Timbuktus. So, this book features scholars from West Africa who, studied in their home country, but then who, dazzled audiences in the Arab world when they traveled there. One is Muhammad al-Kashnawi, who is covered in chapter 2 by Dalia Gubara, entitled Muhammad al-Kashnawi and the Everyday Life of the Occult, who studied in the 18th century in his country, Kassina, and then after that, traveled to Mecca in order to, perform the pilgrimage, and then he also taught there. He settled in Egypt after and died in Egypt, where a necrology of him was written by Al-Jabarti, which immortalized him. He wrote a book which was a major contribution to astrology. Another scholar who is covered in chapter 7 is Oumar Tal, Oumar Foutiyou Tal, who also studied in Senegal and then traveled to Mecca, to the Holy Land, and then later on he wrote a book which called Rimah al-Hizb al-Rahim ala Nuhur al-Hizb al-Rajim, the spears of the party of the merciful And that book was one of the most important texts, in the 19th century. And there are other scholars also covered there. Therefore, there were many important centers of learning and scholars who, after having studied in Africa, taught in Marrakesh, in Cairo, in Mecca, in Medina, and elsewhere.
Right, and Doctor, you named your book, of course, after Timbuktu. What is the role of Timbuktu in the development of Islam in Africa, and why did you specifically choose Timbuktu and not any other place or institution?
First of all, Timbuktu or Sankore in Timbuktu, and there are other mosques like Sidi Yahya Mosque, Jingira Bear, etc., is one of the oldest, one that attracted students and scholars from all over the world. And to know why, Timbuktu in present-day Mali was so famous and attracted so many people, we have to situate that in the world and West African political economy of the period. If Mali in today's West Africa is one of the poorest countries in the world, Mali of the medieval period was one of the wealthiest country in the world. It was the world producer of gold, and a large part of the reserves of gold came from Mali, and it's the gold which attracted people, among other things, to come there, scholars to come to teach. And I don't know if you heard the story of Mansa Musa, who was the king of Mali and who traveled with a large retinue of thousands of people and distributed so much gold that the price of gold fell. He made a very, a great impression to the extent that he is, discussed extensively in Arabic writings of the period and even among European cartographers, and that was in the 13th century. So that a ruler from West Africa, first of all, would perform the pilgrimage from Mali to Mecca and through Cairo and come back with thousands of people, and distributed so much gold, bringing back books and scholars, mean that that region had a long history of prosperity, but also of education. So when he came back, he established, he brought schools and he brought, books and scholars, and this contributed to the expansion of Islamic education. So that's why Timbuktu is very important, because it was a center really in the, very early, and starting with the pilgrimage of Mansa Musa.
Well, it is really, really interesting. And, every Muslim, I believe, must spend time in reading the history, especially of Africa and Timbuktu and Mansa Musa. It really changes our perspective on history. Where today, in the language that is used when we describe such countries, third world, first world, developing, and so on and so forth, it really is not a fair reflection of the history and the achievements of such places. So subhanAllah, it's very important that we study such things and read such books. So that brings us to another question. When we look now in the, like you said, nation states and so on and so forth, when we look at the introduction of Western education systems or institutions, what is the relationship between them and what is their influence in comparison to traditional scholarship? Have they overtaken traditional scholarship, and hence traditional scholarship is a little bit devalued? Or do we say the two play different roles and traditional scholarship is still seen as real scholarship?
Well, this is really a very important question. You see, in West Africa, the first school established to offer education in European language in English was Fura Bay College in the beginning of the 19th century, in the 1820s. And at the time, it was an island in an ocean of Islamic education. But then after colonialism, the colonial state set up schools in, model on European schools, offering education essentially in French, English, and Portuguese. Then they realized at the very beginning of the 20th century that there was resistance to from Muslims to sending their children there. Therefore, they also created bilingual, schools called, Franco-Arab, French-Arabic, for example, in French-speaking countries, where they offered education, Islamic education combined with European education. Therefore, Muslims also copied that model, and they created a number of schools that were bilingual. But some Muslims also resisted totally and continued the pre-existing system of education consisting of Quranic school at the lower level and madrasa or higher education at the higher level.
Right.
And so these schools did not decline, they did not disappear during colonialism. They continue to operate, but producing an elite of scholar ulama who were educated only in Arabic and also maybe in African languages, and these people produce, they continue to write and now to influence the public sphere. They did not disappear, they did not decline, they were just marginalized because the post-colonial state was taken over by elites trained in Western languages who promoted those who were educated in Western languages and marginalized them. But it did not decline, and many actually such traditional schools are even now developing to become universities in the modern sense of the word, and degree granting universities instead of just madrasa where knowledge is certified by ijazat. So now there are dozens of universities offering instruction in Arabic language in sub-Saharan Africa. Some combined, of course, Arabic and Western language, but definitely that scholarship did not disappear. On the contrary.
So would you agree or disagree with the fact that we say the Western educational systems, would you say they are complementary, supportive of Islamic scholarship, or would you say they challenge and undermine traditional teachings?
Well, these are two different approaches to knowledge. In traditional settings, knowledge, first of all, there is no separation between sacred and secular knowledge. So the scholars would teach Quran and Hadith, but they will also teach sciences and mathematics, etc. And you will see, if you look at the manuscript of Timbuktu or other regions, you would see that scholars, they knew logic, they were introduced to Greek philosophy, mathematics, medicines, and also to Hadith, Quran, etc. So first of all, no separation between sacred and religious knowledge, and also knowledge was acquired not just for the sake of making a career, but in order to serve for khidmah. So these are two different conceptions of knowledge. And therefore, there are people who, graduated from, Western type schools as, doctor, engineer, or whatever, but at the same time, who after graduation or while they were studying, attend a madrasa because they need an Islamic education which was not provided in the so-called modern schools. Okay. So therefore, they complement each other, although the goal of colonial rule was to undermine this Islamic this Islamic system of education and replace it with a European system. And that was part of their so-called civilizing mission. But they did not succeed really, and the system had survived, and especially and become even more important now that people can use the ICT in order to spread knowledge at a very large scale.
Okay, that's very interesting. And now, Dr. Ezri, coming towards the latter part of the interview, just like to get some advice from yourself for us and for all the viewers who are watching. So my first question would be on this is, what role do you think that Islamic scholarship from Africa will play in shaping the contemporary Muslim world? So, we can see some of the struggles and problems that the Muslim world is going through in the Arab world, in the subcontinent. What role does Africa play in reshaping or fixing such problems?
Okay, I think that, as you said, we are all part of the same ummah. We may speak different languages, be from different nationalities, but we identify with the 5 pillars of Islam.
Yeah.
And for centuries also, we, have read some of the same texts like the Quran, the Hadith.
Yeah.
We read also, influential scholars in the field of Islamic theology like Ghazali, Ibn Ata'Allah, and others. So there is a lot that we share in common. Obviously, each region of the Muslim world has its own specificities and local dynamics, no question about that. But there is a lot that we share in common, and we will gain from learning about each other, just as scholars, pilgrims who left, South Asia or Southeast Asia to go to Mecca will encounter people there from, Timbuktu or from Fez or from Morocco. They will exchange ideas, and then each will learn from the other. And one of the examples that I gave in the book is, the Al-Kathinawi, chapter 2, who, as I said, studied in Katsina in northern Nigeria and then traveled to Mecca. And he was asked to write a commentary of the, of a book of Fakhruddin Razi, and he wrote it and entitled it Durul Manzum, which is, a major treaty, elaborating astrology and also the use of numerology and some other, secret sciences. So therefore, and he was not known for quite some time, although he wrote in the 18th century. It's only of recent that, Dalia Gobara, the author of chapter 2, wrote about him. So I think, Muslims from different parts of the world would gain a lot in learning about the other Muslims, as they have done for centuries, when they met in the Holy Lands.
So that would then bring me to my next question. What is why do you think it's important for Western Muslims or other Muslims in other parts of the world to learn about Islam and to learn about Africa and the role that it played in its development of Islam?
Okay. At the turn of the 20th century, tens of millions of Muslims are living in the West. They came as immigrants, but then there is a second, a third generation. And these are people from all over the world: North Africa, West Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia. So there is a need to train leaders for those communities who would serve them. At the divinity school where I teach at Harvard, many of our students, the majority almost, are Muslims coming either from the Muslim world or, who were born in America, second and third generation, who are coming to learn about their religion. And when I say learn about their religion, it's about the global history of Islam, not just some regions.
Yeah.
Usually many people think, identify Arab Islam with Arabs, and Arabs represent only 20% of the Muslims. The 80% remaining are from other regions of the world. And Islamic knowledge and Islamic writings, the majority of those, the overwhelming majority who produced Islamic knowledge were not Arabs, they were Ajam. Therefore, you cannot learn and begin to understand Islamic knowledge production without taking into account the contribution of all those groups. And obviously there are some colonial stereotypes and hegemonic discourses that dismissed, Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, saying that, this is a marginal region in the study of Islam, in Islamic knowledge production, which is, of course, not true. This is just, that it, that region has been, has been misunderstood. People did not study it enough, but it's they have made a major contribution. So the story of Islam is a global story, not just about one region of the world. That's why Muslims should learn about the intellectual productions of Muslims from all other regions.
Okay, mashallah, Sheikh, there's really some very interesting questions, and I'm sure we can develop them into lectures and series, and there's a lot to ask, but we have to conclude somewhere. And my last question, or a bit of advice actually from yourself to our audience, and alhamdulillah, we have a large audience, many Muslim youth. What advice would you give to the Muslim youth with regards to them developing and building an awareness of their heritage, especially when it comes to literary works? How is it important? How important is it that we connect the youngsters to these works?
I think an initiative like yours, is a welcome initiative. That Muslims would establish organizations aimed at, disseminating Islamic knowledge and also inviting scholars from all over the Muslim world, not just from some region. So I think this is an initiative which is really something that I hope will be emulated by many in the UK and elsewhere. And I think also that Muslims should train, especially those in the West, in Islamic studies, and serve their communities, in as many capacities as they can. The people that we train here, some of them, they go back home, they serve as teachers, as academics, as chaplains in schools, in hospitals, in prisons, and etc. And they are filling a very important gap. So I think it's important that Islamic knowledge production in the West shouldn't be left to non-Muslims only. Muslims also must make a major contribution to that, because they bring their own perspective, an Islamic perspective.
Yeah, and Doctor, when you mentioned training and becoming more educated, would you then encourage Muslim youngsters to pursue Western academic degrees, a PhD, for example, in Islamic sciences and so on? So, would you encourage people to to pursue PhDs and things?
Well, of course, if they want to join, if they want to make a career in academia, a PhD is required. But and of course, this means that they can do a very very sophisticated research and introduce to Western audiences and educated audience globally, to aspects that of Islamic intellectual history that's not known to them, certainly I will introduce, I will encourage them. But at all level, some want to train as a journalist, others want to create, a non-profit, aimed at, further, disseminating Islamic knowledge. But I think that Muslims, young Muslims should be involved in that, and especially because they come and may bring an Islamic perspective, which non-Muslims may not necessarily bring.
Okay. Doctor, unfortunately there we've reached the top of the hour, and mashallah, there is a lot of questions that I have still myself, but inshallah we will have to encourage everyone to turn to your books. So your books, are both of them, are they widely available for us to purchase?
Yes, they are available on Amazon.com for people who are, based in the West.
Okay, good. So let's have a quick just stay with us, Doctor. So if you look at our website, the Islamic Literary Society, you will see there our work and our activities. We have a number of books in which we work with, we deal with. You've got book reviews of different authors, different topics, but fundamentally all of them revolving around Islam. So do join that. Many books. Okay. So that's the front page. Those are our works. Those are our book reviews. You can look at various topics from Islamic sciences to history to politics. There's a lot there for you to look at. And then you've got here the section on videos. And this is where you will find this video hopefully uploaded very soon. You'll see it there. Inshallah, you'll enjoy these interviews, news and events, reading clubs, right? One of our objectives is to encourage people to read. So inshallah, we get one of our doctor's books and maybe sit down together as a group of 5 or 10 or 15, and we just read. Effectively, we just read. And then there's a special section for patrons and membership where you can join us and get exclusive access to certain material. And that's for membership only. And I encourage everyone to join and get membership. Inshallah, you'll help the Literary Society. And as you heard the doctor say, that this is an initiative that's very, very important. And then you can contact us and ask us any questions or queries that you have. So do join us, and you can see our work there. Alhamdulillah, we are growing by the minute by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So on that, Doctor, I would like to begin by saying thank you very much for giving us your time, your skills, your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And books, displayed in your website by Ibn Khaliqan Wafayat al-A'yan mention the first writing by a West African scholar, which is Ibrahim al-Kanami, the verses that he recited to the Almohad ruler in Marrakesh in the 13th century. So I was very happy to see that book, Wafayat al-A'yan by Ibn Khaliqan. Thank you very much.
MashaAllah, very good, very good. The doctor's got an eye for detail there. And so I'd like to thank you very much, Doctor, for your time and your effort. And inshallah, hopefully in your upcoming work, we can sit down together, have another discussion. So hopefully we will see each other very soon. Thank you very much. Allah reward you. Barakallahu feek. And I conclude by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.